Good evening, everyone. My name is Jill Munson, and I am a Azure Cloud Solution Architect at Microsoft. And tonight we're going to be talking about Azure Cost Management and how you can make the most of your Azure costs by optimizing some of your spend. All right, just a little bit about me. Like I said, I'm already Cloud Solution Architect. I've been in IT for 25 plus years, not to age myself. Been in IT architecture, infrastructure, and operations in a variety of different industries, including healthcare, finance, marketing, and now currently on the federal team. Been focusing on Azure apps and infrastructure with an emphasis on Azure governance, utilizing Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework and well-architected framework. So a lot of the things that we'll be covering tonight are kind of coming from some of those frameworks. So tonight we'll cover what Azure Cost Management is, and then we'll walk through several of the different features currently included. And I've got some slides, but I plan to flip between the slides and do a lot of demoing tonight. So please feel free to ask questions along the way as you have them. Happy to answer any questions you might have. So starting off, what is Azure Cost Management? So Azure Cost Management and Billing, it's a native Azure tool to help you visualize and control your spend in a graphical interface to enable governance, accountability, and optimizations over your cloud spend. And so cost management just in generally, is around the continuous process of planning and controlling costs. And there's three key areas for cost management that we're going to go through tonight. We've got visibility, accountability, and optimization. So starting with visibility, for an organization to be conscious of costs, it needs visibility into those costs. And visibility in a cost-conscious organization requires consistent reporting for the teams that are adopting the cloud. The finance teams who manage the budgets need to have that visibility, and the management teams who are actually responsible for the costs. This visibility is accomplished by establishing the right reporting scope, and we're going to be talking about what that is and what that means. The proper resource organization, so whether you're using management groups or resource groups or subscriptions, clear tagging strategies, and then also the proper access controls. The second pillar here is accountability. So just as important as visibility, accountability starts with clear budgets for your cloud adoption efforts. Budgets should be well established, clearly communicated, and based on realistic expectations. Accountability requires an iterative process because things are always changing, so you need to have kind of that growth mindset to drive the right level of accountability. And then last but not least, we've got optimization. That's what everybody cares about, right? We want you to be spending your money on the right things. So this is the action that creates cost reductions. But you got to keep in mind that during optimization, resource allocations are modified to reduce the cost of supporting various workloads. But that iteration requires experimentation. So sometimes a reduction in cost may reduce performance. So finding the right balance between cost control and end user performance expectations requires input from several different parties. So how I've broken this down, so we've talked a little bit about what Azure Cost Management is and the three focus areas of that: visibility, accountability, and optimization. So we're going to break these down into the areas of these additional tools that are integrated into the Azure Cost Management and Billing. Like I said, we're going to cover a few slides in each of these categories, and then we're actually going to do one category at a time, and then I'm going to hop to a demo, and then we'll pop back to the slides for a few more discussion around like accountability, and then we'll do a demo on that and so forth. So from a visibility standpoint, we're going to talk about cost analysis, forecasted spend, dashboards, exports, even a connector for AWS, and Power BI integration. And then I'm going to demo most of these. We're not going to get in too much into the exports, the connector for AWS, or the Power BI integration, because that could be a whole nother session, but we'll talk through those main top four there. Then when we get to accountability, we'll talk about management groups, role-based access control, tags, Azure Policy, blueprints, and budgets and alerts. And we'll go through most of those in the demo. We won't have a lot of time to dig into too much on Azure Policy because that can get pretty detailed, but we'll talk through what I kind of set up some demos in it. And then we won't get to the blueprints tonight as well, but I'll show everything else there in accountability. And then the optimization, we'll talk about Azure Advisor, Azure Reservations, and Azure Hybrid Benefits, and I'll kind of show you around that a little bit. Any questions before we dive into visibility? All right. So let's dive into cost visibility then. So previously, costs were only provided in the enterprise portal and not within the Azure portal. So if you're familiar with a lot of our portals, we're trying to consolidate those down into one interface. And in September of 2017, we announced the acquisition of Cloudin. So Cloudin was a separate piece of software that did a lot of the cost management. But again, it was a separate software that you had to have. So we've integrated all of those features. We've taken what we've learned since then and built a brand new cost management service from the ground up, which we call Azure Cost Management. It's got improved performance, better user experience, and great integration with Azure services like tagging, management groups, and action groups. Azure Cost Management is on by default. It's free to use, which is great. It's integrated with the Azure Advisor, which we'll talk more about when we get to optimization section. And the cost analysis feature gives you the ability to slice and dice your data and analyze it on multiple dimensions. In this image, you can here on the screen, you can see costs broken down by service name and for the month of December of 2018. So it's a fairly old screen, but kind of gives you a nice visual of some of the areas that you can dive into with cost analysis. You have the ability to change the date ranges from daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, and I'll demo that. And you also have the option to look at different scopes. And so a scope is the boundary area, such as like a management group, if you're using those, a subscription, or even down to a resource group level. And that could be beneficial for different areas of your company, depending on what they need to review in regards to cost. So I'll be showing some of those different scopes as we go through the demo. Cost analysis also allows you to forecast costs for up to a full year. You can view a forecast with multiple dimensions and show where you stand against a budget. So you can see here in this image, we've got the red dotted line there. That is a budget, and I'll show you that when we get to the demo of that as well. So you can kind of see when you're hitting those budgets, and you can also set up alerts on those. Trying to get through the slides pretty quickly so we can get to the demo. But if you have a good visualization that you'd like to save, you can pin it to a dashboard, and I'll show you how to do that as well in our demo. So maybe you need to create a financial operations dashboard and share it among people interested in the spending and consumption of Azure. So that's pretty easy to do. Just to note, though, that when you share out dashboards, it doesn't grant others access to the underlying data. So if they don't have access to the costs, but you grant them access to a shared dashboard, they'll see an access denied message. So you do have to have the proper permissions and stuff set up, and we'll talk through that when we get to the accountability section. You can also set up exports of your costs from within Azure Cost Management and write them to an Azure storage account and then access those via Storage Explorer or other methods. So this is great for maybe you've got your finance team who just wants to look at the data in Excel or a CSV and not have to go into the Azure portal. That's a great option for them, just to export the data out so they can grab it. So what if your company uses multi-cloud and wants to be able to see all of your cloud costs in one interface? The nice thing about Azure Cost Management is we do support AWS, and I believe GCP is on the roadmap to be added, but I'm not exactly sure of the timeline for that to be integrated. But that works by processing the AWS cost and usage report stored in an S3 bucket, if you're familiar with AWS, by using your AWS credentials to get report definitions, and then you're able to download the gzip CSV files. Like I said, we're not going to have time to demo that today, but just did want to point that out, that it is built into the cost management interface. And then we also have the Azure Cost Management Power BI connector, which helps you analyze and manage your Azure costs in Power BI. You can use the app to monitor your costs. You look at usage trends and identify cost optimization options to reduce your expenditures. You do have to have a Power BI professional license in order to use it, along with an enterprise administrator account in order to make those connections. But it's pretty slick how it works. And with that, I try to get through the slides pretty quickly so that we could hop into the demo. So let me hop over and we'll show a few things here. So if you're not familiar with how to get to the cost management billing, I do have it pinned here, but you can go to all services. You can just type in cost management and type. And if you don't have it pinned, you can just mark that blue star there to have it show up over on your left-hand side. So I'm going to drill into the cost management and billing. I'm just in a tenant here that has some demo data in it. So we're going to hop over to the cost management within it, and then cost analysis is where we're going to focus for the time being. So we're going to start from the bottom up here, and I'm going to try to zoom in to where we're going to focus here. We're going to start with, oh, my bad. We're going to start with the these quick hits down here first, these little circles at the bottom, and then we'll work our way up the page. So these quick hits are a nice way to quickly see a pie representation of your spend across different properties. It does default to service name, location, and resource group name, but you can easily modify these. So in looking at this, we can see here we've got quite a bit of DDoS protection set up, and you can drill into these and it'll take you into some additional details. You can also change these. So we're not going to go through all of these different items that you can change them to, but I'm going to talk through a couple of them. So this meter category, go ahead and change that. Actually, I need to drill out. Sorry about that. Let me put this back to the service name. Back at the top level. Yeah, I drilled out too far. All right. That's all right. We're going to stay drilled into Azure DDoS, it looks like. Let me see if I get back out. All right, now we're back. So you can change these to different items. I'm going to go into the meter category. And the meter category is a high-level name for the classification category for the meter within Azure. So as an example, app services and networking might show up here. For compute and VMs, it's like a light switch which we turn on or off when we're using it, or like driving through a way station for storage costs to see how much data is in there. So you can drill into those. But maybe you want to go into another level deep. So you can go into the meter subcategory, just as another example here. And the meter subcategory would be like the VM size, such as a DSV4 or an FSV2 as an example. And some services in Azure could have multiple meters to their service. So the reason I'm bringing this up is there's lots of different options depending on what type of data that you're looking at that you can drill into. But moving back up to the top of the page, we're going to drill into this area here at the top. So starting with scope, and then we'll talk about view, and then the date, and then the filter range. So The scope, as we mentioned, you can look at management groups, you can look at a subscription, you can look at a resource group. I'm just looking at a subscription here for now, but when we get into the accountability, we'll dig into management groups and I'll show you how you can change that scope. The next area is the view, and it defaults to accumulated costs by default, so you can kind of see where we are within the month and how much I've spent. The actual cost is $408 here with a forecast of $2,200. Don't have any budget set up on this subscription because I don't have access actually to set up budgets on that, but I'll show you when we get into my other tenant how to do that. But by default, we have 5 built-in views, and then you can see these private views, which we'll talk about. I've got one set up here. The accumulated cost, like I said, is what it defaults to, and that is how much have I spent so far this month, and it will give you a good idea if you're going to stay within your budget. Then we have costs by resource, and this is all about which resources cost the most so far this month. Daily costs, that's going to, have there been any increases in the cost per day for the last 30 days? So maybe you're trying to find out where all of a sudden you had a big jump in your costs. Cost by service is what we were just looking at in some of the slides. So how has my monthly usage varied over the past 3 invoices maybe would be a good way to look at that. And then invoice details, just like it sounds, so specific details from your invoice. And that's going to be more in a table view than a graphical. We can see here, I actually already pointed out the actual cost, the forecasted cost, and the budget. Those are always going to be right there underneath your scope, so you can have a quick look at that. So let's go ahead and change a couple things. We're going to change it to cost by service, just to play around with some different views here. And then next to the view, we've got our date ranges. So right now I've got set up for July through September. So that's why we're showing 3 different bar charts here. But you can drop it down. You can change it to the last 7 days, this month, a specific date range, the quarterly, yearly, last 12 months. So lots of different options in here to choose from. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at the last 3 months for now, but we'll look at a couple different more views when we get to that. And then as far as the filters go, lots of different filters in here. And when we get to tags, we'll show how to set up the tags on that. But as an example, if we wanted to maybe filter on a specific resource because we didn't, we only needed to care about this app gateway, you could drill into that and then see the differences in the cost just for that specific resource. So lots of ways to filter on different items depending on what you're looking for. I'll go ahead and take that off for now. And then cost analysis does show for the current month by default. I think I was in here playing with it before the call, so I had changed it to the last 3 months, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it for the last 3 months for now. And then let's talk about granularity. So let me drill into that so you can see where that is on the screen, if it'll let me. So granularity is going to be over here under, I've got it set to monthly right now because that's what I had chosen under my view. And then we're also going to talk about the group by and then the different types of charts as well that you can change it to. The granularity, so by default, because we had the accumulated here, and I'll just flip back to that so you can see, the granularity is going to default to that accumulated. But because I changed it by service, that's where it changed that granularity as well. But you have the option here for daily. So if you wanted to see the daily costs, and if I change the view here to maybe the last 3 months again, you can then see the daily costs. I got to change it by resource again. Sorry, change that. So if I change it to daily, you can then see the different costs on a daily representation with the different color coding. I do have the columns stacked here, so we'll talk about that. So lots of different ways to view this. The accumulated defaults to the area graph, but you could change that to a line as well. The column stacked, the column grouped, and then the table is going to be just your data, kind of like your Excel spreadsheet. So lots of ways to make different views of this. So the line in this example, and the reason I brought this view up by service is I can see here that on September 6th, we had an increase in charges, and it looks like the DDoS and the Azure Firewall had some sort of increase that day. So maybe you wanted to use, Azure Monitor to drill into those to try to figure out what changed possibly. Or you can drill into the tagging and things like that, which we're going to do here shortly. We also have the group by, so you can see because I changed the cost by service over here from the view, the group by also changed. But if I went back to the accumulated costs, and then if I chose to group by resource, these are the same options that we had down here on the quick hits, by the way. They're all just different ways of viewing it. So now if I'm grouping by the resource, I can see here that for this month, this particular resource, this hotel's DDoS, as the most cost, and then I've got the Azure Firewall on top of that. And this is my forecasted growth for the month. Unless something were to change, I spin up new items and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and change just a few things here. I'm going to change it to the last 3 months and change that granularity to daily and keep it with group by resource. So I had mentioned this a little bit ago, September 6th. So this is where we can kind of drill in, seeing the peaks and valleys of costs by a particular resource name. So we can see if a resource expanded or resized, increased, decreased in cost day over day. And then you can dig into other tools to figure out what may have changed, what metrics and stuff had changed. You can also save these views as a private view. So you saw earlier I had this quarterly view here. So these are pretty easy once you find maybe you've got something you're always looking at or a monthly view of some kind. You can save these views and then it will show up under your private views. And you can also share those out. There's a share option here at the top that you can share those out to those in your team. So now if I go back, if I jump over to another app and then I come back to cost management, I can just jump to that test demo view then and be able to see that quickly. We talked about dashboards briefly in our slides. So if you have a good visualization that you'd like to save, you can pin it to a dashboard using this little pin icon here at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and set that. And here you can either pin it to a private or a shared dashboard. I'm going to go ahead and leave it on my private one here for now, and we'll hop over to take a look at that. But you could also create a brand new dashboard right from that interface as well. So now if I jump over to my dashboard, I don't have anything real fancy in here, but you can see I've got several different costs and stuff in this dashboard now. And then you could share this out. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a private dashboard, but if I had a public one, you can share it out as long as the individuals that you're sharing it to have access to that data, whether they're in a reader, contributor, or owner role, they'll be able to see these dashboards in. All right. Let's hop back over to our costs again. Our cost analysis. We also have the option here at the top, costs by resource. And these are showing up. I'm in preview mode, so you're seeing a lot of these in preview. But if you wanted to view your costs by a resource or by a resource group or even reservations if you're using them, you can drill into these views and it will break these costs down then. And I'm looking at the month of October here. So that it's an easily consumed view, in my opinion. You can see any tags that you might have set up. It automatically defaults by the most expensive cost, but you can resort that if you'd like. And sort these by different, the different columns that you've got here. And so these resources, here's the resource group. So I could drill in a resource group and see all the resources within that resource group and what they're costing and what they total up to. It's a lot of great information in here. And you can download this data just like you could in cost analysis. There's this download option at the top. This allows you to see it in Excel, a CSV, also PNG for the cost analysis area. And it will download that data in the same view that you're looking at. I'll show you over here under cost analysis as well. Here's the download option. You've got the PNG, Excel, and CSV as options to download those charts to be able to view them. We're going to talk about exports next, which you can get to it right here from this download button. It also is under the settings option here called exports. It's the same interface it takes you to. I don't have any set up in this subscription, but I do have one in the other subscription that we're going to hop to a little bit later. But this just allows you to download the data for maybe your finance team, as I said, in that CSV or Excel format and automatically into a subscription or a storage account. So you can either use an existing or create a new one. You can choose whether you want daily exports of that data, weekly exports, monthly, or maybe just a one-time export. So lots of ways to view that data. All right. And then the connectors for AWS, I just want to point out where that's at. Like I said, I don't have an AWS account connected to right now, but as long as you've got your AWS connectivity, your user accounts and things like that, it's pretty easy to set up. All right, that was it from from a visibility standpoint. Anybody have any questions on visibility before we hop into accountability? All right, quite a bunch tonight. All right, let's dive into.
I don't see anything on the chat also, so I guess.
All right, great, thank you, Bob. Okay, next we'll cover how you plan and monitor your costs using budgets, access control, and policy. So to fully understand your organization's Azure spend, you should organize your resources to maximize insight into cost acknowledgement. So good organization helps to manage and reduce costs and hold people accountable for efficient spending in your organization. And I've got some examples we'll kind of talk through. There's three key groups typically that are needed for costs outlined here on the slide. So we've got our managers. They're going to be our business decision makers in an organization that need to understand the cloud spending to find the best spending results. We've got our finance team that they're responsible for approving budget requests typically across the organization based on cloud spending forecasts, and they also pay the bill and assign costs to various teams to drive accountability. And then we've got our app teams, so our engineers managing the cloud resources on a day-to-day basis. This slide here, it talks about some of the tools that can be used for accountability in regards to Azure consumption. So we want you to take advantage of all these tools as they're designed to help you create accountability in the cloud. We have different services designed to give you insight into where your money is spent. Because like I mentioned before, we want you to be spending on the right things. We don't want you to have some big, 64 by 128 gig server sitting out there running when you're not really utilizing it. We want you to spend it on the right things. So first, starting with our Azure Management group. So these are hierarchy containers up to 6 levels deep that allow you to organize all your Azure subscriptions. And this allows you to look at your costs based on those different hierarchies. And the hierarchies can be, the layout of how your organization is, or they can be completely different. And I'll walk through some examples on that. Role-based access control. We want you to restrict who has access to create resources in order to minimize cloud sprawl. We recommend you using least privilege role-based access control to segregate those duties within your team. So not giving everybody owner access that can create and delete everything out there. Then we got Azure Tags. So as users in your organization add resources to your subscriptions, it becomes increasingly important to associate resources within the appropriate department, customer, environment, as some examples. And so you can attach metadata to resources through tags. Then we have our Azure Policy. So using Azure Policy to audit and restrict access to your Azure resources and deployments. We'll talk through some ideas of how you can restrict types of services so that somebody's not going out and building something really big that they don't necessarily need. Azure Blueprints here in the middle on the bottom. You can use this to deploy and update environments in a reliable, repeatable manner with standardized SKUs. So this lets your teams use Azure in a self-service manner while ensuring organizational standards and cost control are enforced. So very important. And then Azure Budget. So we've talked about Azure Cost Management quite a bit already in relation to visibility, but budgets in Azure Cost Management will help you plan for and drive organizational accountability. So when structured well, cost management and other tools listed here help you inform others about the Azure costs they're responsible for and the money that they spend. And these tools can help you identify your cloud requirements, find resources that are underutilized, remove waste, and maximize cost-saving opportunities. So these are all governance type of tools that are out there, but they all pertain to cost in one way, shape, or form, and we're going to dig into each of those. Got one slide per tool we're going to dive into. So diving into management groups first here. So we have lots of customers that have multiple subscriptions, some in the hundreds of subscriptions. And this makes it more difficult to manage them because you have to manage each one by one. So management groups are essentially buckets of subscriptions. You can see here depicted on the screen to create a hierarchy up to 6 levels deep to organize all your Azure subscriptions. They're integrated with several Azure services like Azure Policy and role-based access control. So you can do things like applying a policy or a user or a group to the management group level, and it'll cascade down to each subscription. Or maybe you want to view costs of all subscriptions within a particular management group in Azure Cost Management. So that's some of the scopes and stuff that we talked about. So lots of different ways to lay these management groups out. They're very easy to use and move around. But on the screen here, we're showing that we've got our root group, and then we've got a marketing team and an IT team. So these are management group structures that were set up. Now, the marketing team only has a dev test subscription, but the IT team actually has one more level deep. So they also have an infrastructure team management group and an application team management group. And then underneath that, they've got multiple subscriptions. So we see customers lay these out by location, some by environment. So whether it's dev, test, prod, lots of different ways to lay these out, or by department as we're kind of showing here. But this allows you to help get the costs based on those different groups because maybe the marketing team doesn't care about what the IT team's spending, as an example. We want to restrict who has access to create resources in order to minimize that cloud sprawl we just talked about, and keeping those least privileged role-based access control assignments set up within your teams. So pertaining to costs, we're only going to focus on these top 3 here because they're related to cost management. If you've been working with Azure for a while, you're probably familiar with the reader, contributor, and owner roles. So the cost management reader is very similar, except it's specific to costs. And so a person assigned this role can view cost data, cost configuration, and view recommendations. And so this is for anyone who should be able to see cost data, but not able to look at shared views or manage budgets. And we got the cost management contributor role, who is able to view costs, manage costs, create budgets, and view recommendations. So this is for anybody who needs to be able to see the data and save those shared views and manage budgets. And then the billing reader is maybe for somebody that has that needs to look at invoices, and this is for like the pay-as-you-go subscriptions. So not necessarily an enterprise agreement, but if you're using like a Visual Studio Enterprise agreement and you've got a subscription set up, this would be a pay-as-you-go type. So those are the three main areas, and we're going to demo how to set those up using management groups. We'll kind of tie that all together. And then we talked about tags. So as users in your organization add resources, it becomes important to associate those resources with, you know, whether it's departments or customers, environments, that sort of thing. You can actually tag resources up to 50 key pairs if you want. It used to be 15 and we increased that up to 50. Haven't ran into many customers that are using 50 different tags on each resource, but it's possible. Tags are not inherited for parent-child resources. And the reason for that is maybe you've got a network resource in a resource group that wouldn't necessarily have the same owner as all the other resources in there. What tags you apply to resources and what tags are required differs among different organizations. So some examples would be, you know, the owner who created the resource itself, what environment, what the application name is, maybe the department name. So lots of different options to figure out what makes sense for your company. But they're going to be important because you can drill into cost management by tags, and I'll show you where that setting is at in Azure Cost Management. Then we've got Azure Policies. So this sits at the core of Azure and gives you the ability to codify your company policies into the platform. One core benefit is that, you know, Azure's constantly changing. We're adding on services, but as the services are going live quite often, any new service will be governed by Azure Policy from day one. That's the way we built it out. So there's essentially three kinds of policies. We've got auditing, and this is the one that we recommend getting started with. This means that users can use Azure with no restrictions, but if somebody goes against a policy, you'll be able to see the compliance state in an easy-to-use view. So you don't have to go through and run PowerShell scripts every 24 hours or anything like that to check the compliance status. The next step up from that is enforcing the policies. And this is essentially where you're setting guardrails. And this means that if you have an enforced policy, users have to do it that way or they'll get a deny error. So if you're requiring a tag, as an example, before somebody can create a resource, if they don't provide that tag, they will not be able to create a resource. And then remediation is the last type, where you can get back to a desired state, the resources that are non-compliant. So if you set up a policy today, and it's not going to remove any of your existing resources that are out there that don't meet that policy, but you'll set up a remediation task then to go through and add tags, as an example, to those non-compliant resources that are out there. So some of the policies that you might want to put in place in regards to costs are going to be restricting expensive SKUs. So I talked about, you know, a 64 CPU by 256 gig server. Maybe you don't want to have that out there. Or restricting Azure regions to help improve performance. Maybe you got data sovereignty or cost concerns. And applying and enforcing tags, as I mentioned, to identify the owner, environment, or cost centers is going to be important in relation to cost management. And then maybe even auditing services deployed from the Azure Marketplace. So you can keep an eye on those. Moving on to Azure Blueprints. So Azure Blueprints enable your cloud architects and your central IT groups to define a repeatable set of Azure resources that implement and adhere to your organization's governance, your standards, your patterns, your requirements. They make it possible for your development teams to rapidly build and stand up new environments with trust that they're building within your organization's compliance, allowing to speed up the deployment and development delivery. They can be managed from a central location, and they have the ability to track versioning and even lock resources that you don't want subscription owners to change. So like I said, I'm not going to demo this because it does, it takes a little bit, but it might be a future reference point if we haven't already done that topic in the user group. Budgets and alerts in Azure Cost Management help you plan for and drive your organizational accountability. They help you inform others about their spending, to proactively manage costs, and to monitor how that spending progresses over time. So you can use these budgets to compare and track spending as you analyze the costs. Budgets are an early detection system, so they're going to alert you before you get too far. And if somebody has blown out the budget. In fact, beyond setting budget email alerts to the finance team, you can run messages to teams that are developing on the subscription, and also automate shutting down resources or resizing them smaller or locking them from being changed until the end of the month. So lots of things with automation that you can do there in relation to those alerts. You can create these budgets monthly, quarterly, or annually, and we'll talk through that in the demo. But just keep in mind that your budget should never be static. So it's an iterative growth process. So part of the monthly operational review process, budgets may need to be adjusted up or down based on the project being deployed, or expansion or retraction of the application solution itself. When the budget thresholds you've created or exceeded, keep in mind, notifications are triggered and none of your resources are affected and your consumption isn't stopped. I'll repeat that. So if you hit a budget threshold, we're not stopping your services. We're just alerting you that you're reaching that budget. Now you can set up the automation with the alerts, like I said, to resize things, but by default, once that is triggered, it's not shutting anything down. You have to go in and adjust things as needed. All right, let's hop over to the demo. And I'm going to hop over to another tenant that I have, because I have more control in this one to be able to create management groups and things like that. For some reason, Microsoft doesn't give us access to their tenant to create all these cool things. So from management groups, again, you can go to all services and management groups, and I have that pinned down here. So I'm just going to hop down to it for time's sake. So I've got a few management groups set up, and I'll just expand them to kind of give you an idea. So right from the overview page, I can see that my root tenant root group here has APAC, has a Contoso, EMEA, and then a US management group. And you can see I only have one subscription here, but you can probably get the general idea if you've got multiple subscriptions and they're all under these different areas. It's going to be an easier way to manage your policies, your role-based access control and such. So we're going to walk through creating just a couple management groups so you can see how easy they are. And since we're in the US, I'm going to stick with the US here. So I do have a finance and an IT management group. We're going to go ahead and use this IT one. Oops, didn't mean to go all the way into it. There are several different ways to create the management groups. We've got this nice little context bar here where you can create child group objects here. You can add a subscription here. You also have the option to create them from up top. I'm going to go ahead and just create the child group here since I've got it selected under this IT group. A couple things to note. The management group ID cannot be updated after creation. What I recommend customers to do here is to use a GUID generator and just post those in there, because that's not something you're ever going to really need to be changed. However, if you put a name in here, a friendly name that's similar to your display name, the management groups are really easy to create. And if you decide you want to change something later, you can just simply delete it and create a new one. But I've got a few GUIDs here that I'm just going to copy over. And we're going to create I'm going to call it US-MG-IT- we'll call it dev. We'll just stick with dev tonight. And I'll go ahead and submit. It's going to go ahead and kick off that job. It's pretty quick. I'm going to go ahead and create yet another one. create another, copy another one of my GUIDs over. And we'll call this one USMGIT. Oh, I didn't put my dashes in there, right? It's important to have the names, something that you're going to be able to understand, because when we move the subscription around, you'll see that you want to be able to look at that display name and know exactly which one you're looking for. So that second one's kicked off now. So I can expand this out. I see our dev one here already. Like I said, it's pretty quick. So that other one will show up here in a moment. And actually, I didn't put this one in the correct place. So if you see here, the last one, the prod one actually went right under that tenant root group. So we're going to move that one. I'll show you how easy it is to move them around. All right, so now we have our dev one under our IT, but this prod one is created in the wrong spot, or maybe something changed along the way. So I'm going to go ahead and move that one. And then it asks you where you want to move it to. So this is where the naming convention really comes in, so you can tell where you want it. So I'm going to put it under the US MGIT and save it. And it'll refresh, and now I have them in the right location. So they're really easy. It's not changing any of the resources that you might have under it. It's just a hierarchy. It's just an organization. Mike, you had a great question. The GUID generator is not part of the Azure portal. There's lots of them out there. The one that I went to is this GUIDgenerator.com, but great question. So now that we have our structure in place, and this does take some planning of how your management groups are going to be laid out. You can see now I have my Visual Studio Enterprise subscription here directly under this US management group. We're going to go ahead and move that under our dev, so under our US MGIT dev. Again, pretty simple, just like moving a management group, moving the subscription is the same process. So I'm going to find my IT dev, and here it is. I do want to point this out. It does make a note here for a valid reason. So when you move a management group or a subscription under a different management group, if you had different policies applied, it's going to apply those policies. I mean, that's the whole point of having these management groups. So permissions could change and policies could change. So we want to make sure you're aware of that. Again, pretty quick process to move that subscription. So now it's going to show up under my dev management group. So I'm going to drill in now to my management group here. And several different options in here. I can look at policy, which we'll get to here in a minute. But the one thing I wanted to go over before, actually, so cost analysis is right down here at the bottom. So I could drill right into that management group, and I could see it changes my scope, and will default to that same scope that I have selected. Here I can go in and I can change it to a different scope. So if I wanted to go up to a different management group, I could change that and the costs would all be changed along with it. Now, if I choose this EMEA non-prod, I don't have a subscription under it, so the costs are all going to be blank. Yeah, so it's going to error out. But if I go back to my US and drill into my dev, that's where my subscription's at. And so now I see that scope and all the costs associated with it. So that's where the scopes come in handy if you want to see a particular hierarchy that maybe has multiple subscriptions under it. That's where you would go. I'm going to go back to my management group here though, and access control IAM is where I want to go next. So we talked about the cost management roles. So we've got that cost management reader. So if I go into my access control IAM, which is a default blade on pretty much every service that we have out there, but I'm at the management group level. If I go to add role assignment, and for role, you can just click on it and you can find it in the list, or you can just type it in. So I'm going to find that management reader role. And here are some of my users and my tenants. So I'm going to give Alex Wilbur here access as a cost management reader to my management group and all subscriptions underneath that. Now, granted, I only have one subscription under this one, but now if I look under role assignments, there's Alex Wilbur. The nice thing about doing permissions at the management group level is now if I add a second or a third or even a fourth subscription under that management group, Wilbur or Alex is going to have access to all of those subscriptions. So I don't have to go into each subscription and manually add him. So that's one of the benefits of management groups, as well as policies. So we're going to go into policy next, but just want to point out you can drill right into your Azure policies right from there. And so our tags is what we were going to go through, but just for time's sake, this does take a little bit to set up. So I did set this up yesterday, and I'll walk you through how to do that. But within Azure Policy, we have things called definitions. And these definitions can be a little overwhelming to create if you're not familiar with Azure, because it is using JSON, and it's, like I said, it can be a little overwhelming. This is what JSON looks like. This is a default template, but I like to point all of the new users to Azure to using these initiatives. And I'm going to go back to, oh, I went too far out. These initiative definitions are kind of like an a la carte. So you're picking and choosing what you want to put into it. And the basic information here that you fill out is, what location. So this is that scope. So you can set it at a management group level. You can set it at a specific subscription level if you want. Again, that's where that scope can be changed. You give it a name. You give it a category. The category is just a grouping of these definitions so that you could drill in and filter on them later. I'm going to step back to the one that I created, but the nice thing about those initiatives, and here I have it. I keep clicking too far in it. This is the one that I created yesterday. So this USMG tag policy. And I set this up as an initiative. And if I go into these are the initiatives that I added to it. So actually, let me show you where that is at from a policy perspective. Sorry about that. This initiative definition. So this is how I created it. If I give it a name, the policy definitions, this is the a la carte that I was talking about. There's so many out here. I don't even know what the count is. 500, 600, I don't know. There's a lot of different options in here to choose from. But from a tagging perspective, because tags are important to cost, and that's why we're bringing it up here, there are quite a few options for tagging. So the ones that I set up are to add a tag to a resource group. This will trickle down to all of the resources within it if you choose to. Got lots of different options in here. But this is where the you don't have to know the JSON. It's going to create it for you because we have got lots of options out here to choose from. But if I go back to my one that I created last night, this is where some examples are. So I added 3 different tags, and I can go into these tags and show you. So this is the JSON, but again, don't get scared because I didn't have to write all this. It was pretty easy. The definitions themselves are, if I edit the initiative here, I can actually go in and edit that policy definition if I wanted to. Don't have any groups or anything set up here. Here's where I wanted to go, sorry. So the initiative parameters itself. So you set up the policies, you choose the a la carte, what we want set up, which I did the tagging on 3 different resource groups. And then I set up an environment tag, a department tag, and an owner tag, just to give you an idea of how they might apply to costs. And within here, you can set up values to basically to choose from with the drop-down list. So I threw in a POC, a dev, test, production, and QA. So you can provide those for your users, so you're not having typos of, department spelled with an extra A or something like that. You can specify exactly the way you want them, so they're chosen right. But once you set those, it's pretty easy. It's a quick little process. I'm adding the tag, setting the value to environment. I'm using that initiative parameter, and that environment tag was the 5 different options I had for the different environments that I'm allowing. And then you apply it. So I applied it at the management group level. And so now if I actually jump over to my subscription and I go to tags, and it can take about 15 minutes for these policies to roll out. So that's why I did these last night. But I moved my subscription, remember, to a different management group. So I lost my tags. But actually, I think I rolled it out to the management group level. At any rate, once I moved my subscription around, I think I lost those tags. So I would have to reapply that policy. But that is one way to push out policy pretty quickly. Here you can see the policies that are applied for that particular management group. And it shows that it's non-compliant. You can drill in and you can see which resources and stuff need to be remediated. So this one was compliant because I remediated that last night, but these other ones need to be adjusted yet, kicked off. So a lot goes into policies. I don't want to spend too much more time on it because it can take a little bit to set up. They take a little bit to run, but pretty slick, and especially using those management groups to roll those out. So let's hop back over to our cost management billing because we want to see how that policy and those tags apply now. So if I go to my cost management and in my cost analysis, this is a different tenant than what we were showing earlier. So you can see my actual cost only $26.33 with a forecast of $145. The filters now, so the tags that I just put on there aren't going to show up because I moved them, but here's some other ones that I previously set up. So if I wanted to look at the cost center that was set up as 00001, I can drill into that and now only see those costs associated with that tag. So you can see how that can come in handy. Maybe you only care about the dev costs that you're trying to drill into, or production, or a marketing department, that sort of deal. So that's where the tags really come in handy with the cost management. Okay, what else do I want to show you in here? Got lots of questions in here too. So when you move, Roger asked, when you move a management group, do the resources move with it? So the storage accounts and things like that? Yes. Now it doesn't affect those resources other than it's moving the hierarchy. So all of those accounts that might have been under that subscription will move with it, yes, but it doesn't affect them. Mike asked the question, these are all great questions. So how would I prevent Wilbur from inheriting the role at a particular subscription under the management group? So if you're not wanting them to be inherited, there are exclusions that you can apply, but because you applied it at that higher level, it would roll that down. So you would have to go in and modify those permissions if you didn't want Wilbur to have access to a particular subscription that is underneath a management group. But there's ways to exclude it as well. Vabav, I thank you. I see you're answering some of these questions as we go along.
I've been trying to respond back.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I just saw the chat all of a sudden.
The other one which Mike asked about the inheritance, I am just gonna post a link to
Perfect.
it, I think, which says the same thing. It is by design. Whenever we assign RBAC on a higher scope, it gets inherited, and there is no way we can prevent it or block it by design.
Right. Exactly. So like if I went in here and I looked at that permissions for it. Actually, it was at the dev level, wasn't it, that we set it? Drill down one more level. So it'll show this resource, but if I go down to the subscription level here, just as an example, if you were to add another subscription, this is kind of what it would look like. It's going to say inherited for Alex Wilbur, inherited from the management group. And like Bob said, that is by design. So you would have to, if you didn't want them, you have to go in here and remove it, but otherwise it's inherited by default. All right, so we did the tagging. I showed you how to download. Let's look at forecasted cost because we talked about that earlier, but I didn't actually show that. So back to the cost management. Oh, actually, I wanted to jump over. So the cost analysis, the forecasting with the accumulated, that is the forecasted view here. As you can kind of see that I've spent $28, but I'm forecasted to spend that $145. But without going into cost management, you can get that right from your subscription as well. So if I drill into my subscription here, on the overview page, I will get that forecasted view right there. And it will show the nice line here showing where my budgets and stuff are set. Actually, this is showing my max. So I've got a $150 limit on this one since it's just a credited account. But you also have cost by resources here right on your page. If you drill into these, if I go to view details, that's going to pull me back into that cost management and billing blade. Same view that we were just looking at. But let's talk about budgets next. So you can see I've got the actual cost, forecasted costs, and I've got a budget here. I've actually got just one right now. I had one that I removed beforehand. So the budget, if I go to my monthly spend here, change that to default view. Now you see that budget line. So I set up a $50 budget. It's going to alert me when I hit that. So come October 10th, 11th, I'm going to get an alert via email because that's the way I set that up. And we'll walk through another one, but letting me know that I'm hitting that limit. These come in handy. Like I said, I actually didn't have a budget on one of my other accounts that doesn't have a limit. And all of a sudden I spent $2,500 and got some nasty grams via email from Microsoft. So just goes to show having those budgets set up to alert you in case you build something out and forget about it and it builds out and grows and exceeds your budgets. So they are pretty easy to set up. I'm going to go back into the whole interface so you can see the budgets. So the budgets here are under cost management. And I've got the one, but let's go ahead and create another one. You can change the scopes. We've talked about the different scopes. So if I wanted to create a budget at the management group level, I could do that. In fact, let's go ahead and do that since we created that management group. And we'll do it at the dev scope. So that's going to change that now to say our USMG IT dev. It's going to give me a nice little view of kind of what my spend has been. You have to give it a unique name. So I'm just going to do, if I could type right. And then that reset period we talked about. You can set up a monthly budget, a quarterly budget, and an annual budget. I typically do a monthly since on this subscription, it does reset on a monthly basis. It's going to default to your create date. So actually my billing period is October 1st. So that's why it defaulted to that October 1st. You can give it an expiration date. It usually does 2 years out. You want to make sure you're keeping an eye on that. I did actually, in that example I just gave, I had a budget set up, but I let it expire. And so wasn't aware that my costs were exceeding. The budget amount, so what is your threshold going to be? So I've got that other one set at 50. It does give you a suggested budget based on your forecast. So I would go over my budget already if I set my suggested budget to 151 since my max limit is 150, but I'm going to go ahead and set it for 100 here. Once you plug that in, it's going to give you that nice little dotted line that will show up on your graph once you save this. But I'm going to go ahead and say next. And then we need to give it an alert condition. Alerts are next. So just creating a budget doesn't do anything if you're not telling somebody about it, right? So you do need to have at least one email address and at least one actual and the percentage of the budget to alert you at. You can have up to 5 actuals. So I could say, you know, send me on $50, $25, $100. I could set all those up if I wanted to, and have up to 5 emails. And then in addition to it, you can set up another forecasted alert as well, but that is optional. So I'll go ahead and I'll do an actual, the percent of my budget. So I'll set it to 50, which I had set the budget up of $100, so it's going to alert me at 50. If you wanted at 100, you could set it at 100, and that would tell you at 100. But you can go anywhere from 1 to 100, just as it sounds. And then where you want that email to go to, I'll just set my Hotmail account. Like I said, you can set up multiple ones if you want. It is recommended that you add the Azure no reply at Microsoft.com so these don't get caught in your spam bucket. And then you can set a default language, lots of different options in here. I will just leave it as default United States. And then you create it. Pretty simple. It's going to validate it. And if I refresh, oh, that is the one I just created. So now if I go back to my cost analysis, I will have that option for the budget here. There's the $100 one I set up with the appropriate name. I could also, if I had other ones set up in here, I could look at those as well. But it shows me my nice dotted line, so I can keep an eye on this and know when I'm getting close. And here you can see I'm going to go over my budget. All right. Let's see. Wanted to point out one more thing, and I went too far in the budgets, but the cost alerts. So we just created that budget, but the cost alerts was part of that as well. So I'm going to go in here and edit this one. There we go. Actually, it's not going to let me edit it in here. That's okay. I'm just going to create a new one real quick just so we can see. Here it is. Oh, pin it to my dashboard. That's not what I want. There it is, edit budget. The action groups, I'm not going to go into too much on that because that's a whole nother topic and just for time's sake. But these action groups, and actually I don't have the action group option because the subscription is my $150 Visual Studio one. I'll hop back over to this other one so you can see it though. The action groups allow you to specify what you want to do it. And by default, it's going to be that email like we had set up, but you can also set up notifications via SMS, Azure App Push, and Voice if you wanted to get alerted that way. And then the actions can be configured. This gets into the automation that I mentioned earlier for things such as running automation runbooks or Azure Functions or kicking off an ITSM job, maybe to ServiceNow or something like that, or a Logic app or a webhook. So there's lots of different options in setting those actions up. It's not going to let me set it up in there. I thought so. That's why I was under here. Why is it not showing me my action groups? That's all right. At any rate, I just wanted to point them out. They typically will show up in here as an action group. Maybe it's because, nope. It was showing up in here earlier. I'm not sure why it's not right now, but that's where the action groups would show up that you can configure. So that's all I had from an accountability standpoint. Any questions on some of those tools that you can use before we hop over into optimization? Okay. Well, let's hop into, I only have a few slides on optimization. It is very important, so how optimizing is important. You've got to have an understanding of your applications in order to optimize them. And I always like to show this slide. So the workload that we're talking about in the scenario here will run fine in all three sizes, VM sizes. What do you think a developer is naturally going to choose? Now, for me, I'm going to choose VM1, right? I want it to perform the best. I want it to be the biggest, which is going to deliver the most success to the business. Probably VM2. And which one is going to make the managers in finance want more things in the cloud? Probably VM3. So if it's going to run on all three of these, we need to keep the cost in mind. So knowing where to optimize is really the focus of that discussion. So Azure Advisor is your personalized cloud consultant that's going to help you follow best practices to optimize your Azure deployments. And it's free to use, so definitely dive in and start using it if you're not already. So with Azure Advisor, you can get proactive, actionable, and personalized best practices. You can improve your performance, security, and high availability of your resources as you identify opportunities to reduce your overall Azure spend. And it does have actions in line where you can go in and remediate things right away. So it not only analyzes your resource configuration and usage telemetry, but it then recommends solutions that can help you improve not just cost, and the slide actually doesn't show all of the items, but also performance, high availability, operational costs. Operational excellence is the one that's missing on this slide, and security. So it's all tied in to Azure Cost Management. So things like right sizing, or if you have idle resources, so if you delete a virtual machine, but you forget to delete the storage that's associated with that, or if you set up a public NIC by accident and then you remove the NIC, you still have to go delete that NIC resource, otherwise you get charged for that. So these are areas that Azure Advisor will tell you. It'll also make recommendations on Azure reservations. So if you've been running a particular VM size for months and months and months, and it will recommend a specific Azure reservation where you can get reduced costs because you're submitting that you're going to use it for a year or 3 years commit. Which Azure reservations is the next slide I have here. So it was previously called reserved instances, but it's now been rebranded to Azure reservations because it's not only applicable to VMs. You can also get SQL database, Cosmos DB reservations as well now too. But Azure reservations offer significant savings up to even 72%. They allow you to give budget predictability and prioritize compute capacity, as well as offering you flexibility to modify the reservations as needed, so you're not locked into a specific size as your cloud situations change. And then Azure Hybrid benefits, another great option to save. So if you have software assurance on your Windows Server and SQL Server licenses on-prem, Azure Hybrid Benefits is going to help you with that. It enables you to bring your on-prem license rates for Windows Server and SQL Server for use in your Azure VMs and save up to 85%. And so if you combine that with your Azure reservations, your hybrid benefits can save you up to 93%. So quite a substantial savings there. And Azure Hybrid Benefit is another cloud provider doesn't offer this. It's because we've got the Windows OS and the SQL OS, we can offer that, whereas another cloud vendor doesn't have that option. So definitely have some savings there. So let me show you on the virtual machines. I'll just show you the hybrid benefits. I set up this virtual machine yesterday. I built it pretty big. Hopefully that our Azure Advisor will show some recommendations. But when you set this up, when you set up your virtual machines, here's the option for using those hybrid benefits, the licensing and stuff. You can change it after the fact. So if I'd actually set this up without setting that to yes, I could go in and I could change that. I believe the SQL ones, it used to be where you couldn't change that after you created it, but I think we've modified that. Don't quote me on that, but that's where that setting is at, where you're just stating I already have a license, and it is going to reduce the cost of that virtual machine. But hopping over to Azure Advisor. I was hoping it would give me some cost savings here, but my VM hasn't been running long enough, unfortunately. So this is where you can drill in and you can see the cost savings, and it will show you things such as if I built this virtual machine too big, it will say, hey, you know, you really have only been using 2 CPUs and 4 gig of memory. Why don't you change it? And this is how much you'll save. It will tell you, like I said, the reservations. If you're using a virtual machine for a long period of time, it will tell you, make recommendations on how to save that by committing to a 1-year or 3-year agreement on it. And like I said, you can change those sizes. So if you buy some reservations and then you decide that you need a different size, you can trade those in and get different sizes for those Azure reservations. And then the IO resources will also show up here in costs as well. And I wish I had some more items to show you, but I think even this other tenant, I didn't have any cost recommendations because we try to keep our costs on our subscriptions fairly low, so we're not blowing out our budgets like I did that one time. Yeah, it's not showing any. Oh, let's see. Yeah, no list of recommendations here, but that's where they would show up. And you can actually, if I drill into a security one, I'm going to hop back over to the subscription here and hop into security just to show you some recommendations, even though they're not cost related. So this particular one, there's system updates that need to be installed on this one virtual machine that I created. So I can drill into this and it will tell me a little bit more about it. Some of them will allow you to go ahead and remediate them, or they'll tell you what the remediation steps are. We'll tell you what affected resources there are, so you can go back to those owners of those resources to take care of those items. Let me see if there's one other item. Virtual machine replication. And it will take me right to that, that VM so I can make those modifications. So Azure Advisor, great friend to have to help you save costs. Like I said, I wish I had some examples in here, but you've got your cost, your security, your reliability, operational excellence, and your performance. So lots of great things there. With that, I thank you all for your time. I know I ran a little bit over where I wanted to be, but any last standing questions that you guys might have?
You are just on time. And I've been taking some notes, Jill. A couple of things wanted to point out. One was on the management groups, when you were creating, the name that you give to your management group is fixed. So once you give it, it's static. You cannot go and change that back again.
Just the GUID. You can change the friendly name.
Yes, and yeah. I would have missed that, but I think that was the reason you added a GUID in there, because you cannot go and change that.
Yes, I can't change that first name within it, but you can change the friendly name. So like this one, I could go in here and I could rename this part, but I can't change the GUID.
Same.
Yep.
And the second thing was when you were mentioning about reservations, if you go and look into cost management, there is an actual cost and there is amortized cost. So what you will see in actual cost is how much your reservation costed. But if you want to see how your reservation gets broken among actual resources, then you have to go and look at amortized costs. For example, if I bought a reservation for virtual machines, for 10 virtual machines, it will, in my actual invoice, it will say I bought reservation for $10,000, and all those 10 machines will show as $0. But if I have to find out which machines, how much each of those machines costed me, I have to go and look for amortized cost. And that has been the most weird thing I've found about it. When we buy reservations, Microsoft picks up those machines at random. There is no fixed criteria we can provide. Let's say if I have 100 machines and if I only want to take reservations for specific 10 machines, there is no way I can do it. Microsoft decides that on its, I don't know, some random algorithm.
Yeah, that is the misconception, that it's going to be tied to a particular VM. You could specify specific VMs by tying it to the reservation to a resource group or a specific subscription, but it's going to take any of those virtual machines in that.
If I have 5 virtual machines and if I buy just 1 reservation, it can pick any of those in the resource.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. But anyone in the audience, if you have any questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself now. If you want to ask anything to Jill, or if you want to discuss anything, you can do so now. So Roger commented that he has been playing with the CSV for the Azure Cost, and it has been an educational experience for him. Yeah, well, if there is nothing else from anyone else in the audience, I would like to thank you, Jill, once again. Apparently, you are the first female speaker for the user group in past 2 years since I have been organizing the meetings. So
We'll have to change that.
You have broken the record. So thanks, Jill, once again for taking time out to present today. I'd go ahead and stop the recording.